Zach, the owner of the UKCC tournament scene in the UK, arguably as well, probably the biggest independent tournament scene in the world. That's probably a big statement, but I think actually you probably are the largest tournament provider in the world, and it's
Yeah, yeah.
what an achievement, Zach. Like it's absolutely outstanding. But before we get into the interview, and Zach, like I said, amazing to have you here. We we do like to talk about some of our community posts, guys, and this tonight we are going to talk about one of the community armies that we picked actually from the UKTC Discord itself. If you haven't joined the UKTC Discord, then why? You need to get on the UKTC Discord. On there, you're able to see photos from the events. You're able to see when they're going live, when the tickets are live, where they're available from. So I really heartily suggest you get on there. But tonight I picked Chris from 6 Plus Plus and his Necrons. And this is a picture of the Necrons that he picked at one of the events recently. And it's probably quite good considering Necrons are doing rather well in the meta right now, dominating that scene. And I'm sure Zach's going to see an awful lot of Necrons coming to Northampton. But this particular army is stunning. And there's one photo he sent me which I just have to highlight, and it's absolutely amazing. Here it is. Look at that. Absolute stunning model. So I've just been told I'm a little bit quiet. Let's be professional and get my volume up a little bit.
Yeah, I think the Void Dragon being one of the new Necron models, it just came out so beautifully, and like it's always strange seeing it compared to the other Catan. And actually, I think it'd be something that's interesting to talk about a little bit with yourself, Zach, and how those slightly different, sometimes proxies or like third-party models, and their place within the tournament scene. Because I've seen some gorgeous Nightbringers before, but they are significantly larger than the normal Nightbringer model. I can't believe that's on a 40mm base now that a Space Marine Terminator Captain's on a 50mm. But I think that must always be a bit of a strange one as a TA. But we'll come on to that in a bit. Aaron, how's your ODA?
Hopefully I'm back, but the guys live I'm sure will be able to tell me that I've just turned myself up a little bit. Zach, one thing I did warn you about is when you join a Black Crow Gaming stream is that we like to do great head swaps. Just so everybody's favourite, you get to see Elder Toby back here again, ready to sell the Bibles. But we thought because you are the banner bearer of the UKTC, and you're definitely flying the flag for the dominating UK scene. Here you are. What do you think tonight? Are you a fan?
I didn't really understand what the joke was, but now you called me a banner bearer. I think it makes much more sense. But yeah, no, it's all good. Golden armor. I'm not sure. What's that? Minotaur or something? I'm not a.
I can get behind Minotaurs. Minotaurs are the way forward, in my opinion.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm much more of a heretic Astartes than a golden boy myself. So.
Oh, a fan of the Horus, are you?
I don't know. I just always cheer for the bad guys. Like that moment at the end of the Avengers where Thanos clicks his fingers was like the best bit. Normally, I'm like, yeah, we
that
won!
was that. I am inevitable was a bit of a yeah. That was a pretty sick moment.
Yeah. So yeah, I always cheer for the baddies.
Oh, so you're probably like this one of Dom then. When we had Dom and his Nurgling wall, he's him building a wall of Nurglings when he plays people. That's obviously had some fun in the past. We had last week. He went to a tournament and he basically rode out 4 units of Nurglings so that World Eaters player couldn't get a turn 1 charge, and that particular player is now done like #ban Nurglings. So Dom is the bad guy in this setting. But we have lots to ask. Let's get into the interview itself. So Zach, let's get started with probably the easiest question you're going to get tonight. How did it all begin?
Well, I think the story's been told many times about sort of how the LGT got started, which vastly predated the UKTC. But the UKTC story is actually much more interesting, I think. It fundamentally started because of a group chat I was in, where somebody was, saying it's great that the LGT's back post-COVID, being cancelled a couple of times because of lockdowns and whatnot. And he said, but it's a shame there's only one a year. And I'd always been thinking to myself, well, can't run 2 LGTs a year because then the first one won't be a special anymore. And at the time, I'd very much been thinking of that in the context of running 2 large events in London. And what happened with the UKTC was that actually that sort of got reframed, and we set up 2 events, first of all, Leicester and Nottingham, so in different cities. So they sort of had their own thing that was special about them, that was separate from the LGT. And through doing that, we had to sort of be a bit introspective and ask why we're doing it in the first place, and like what the purpose and what the need is that we're fulfilling. And that's from business speak, it's like your mission and your vision. You got to understand like what does success look to you, and what's the mission that's going to get you there. And going through that sort of process, defining what we were trying to achieve, was how the UKTC came into being, really. Which UKTC came after we'd already launched a bunch of these regional events, and what we wanted to do was tie them all together into some sort of cohesive entity, so that people weren't just going to this event in Northampton, this event in Southampton, but were part of a bigger community. So it's very much came from the community. Like the idea was given to me by a group chat I was in, and ultimately it's come to be its own community, and I'm basically just been the sort of medium through which that is coming to being.
Okay, fantastic. I mean, I think that brings up an interesting question, because obviously there were some tournaments obviously before COVID and everything like that. But do you feel like that COVID boom, because so many people that I talked to, they started, myself included, started during COVID. Do you feel like that COVID boom kind of paved the way for the UKTC?
Yeah, I mean, it did in 2 ways. One, the lockdowns themselves just created more demand for tournaments post-lockdown. People wanted to be more social than they perhaps were before. And that was amongst existing players. Secondly, the amount of existing players increased because of people like yourself that got into it during COVID. Those 2 things sort of happened at the same time. And the growth of the events sort of came out of necessity. It was like, if we were going to do 3, then we should probably do 4, because of the amount, having to get all the infrastructure in place to run 3 is the same as it is for 4. So obviously by doing 4, you're able to put on a better show for all 3 of them, sort of thing. So the LGT actually, I said it was the first one we did, but actually we used to run these sort of pre-LGT prep events just so we could get a bit of extra practice in as organisers. And we'd run them like 3 months before the LGT, so we could iron out any kinks. And what I think many of our long-term attendees realise is like the events keep getting better and better, is a very common piece of feedback we get. And it's because we're just getting more and more reps in as an organisation. And that was really sort of part of the reason that the event, we weren't making silly mistakes from an organisational point of view anymore. So I think you combine the increase in demand from end of lockdown with more players playing, / the event quality itself also getting better. I think that those sort of 3 things together sort of created the boom. I think the more interesting point is like what happens after the boom, because that could be a Hollywood movie. There you go, with Adam Sandler and whatever. Or after the boom, I think what's happened with COVID is because people got into Warhammer during COVID, a lot of the stigmas that are sort of evolved around Warhammer when people started playing when they're young teenagers, so they're getting grief at school or whatever for playing. That didn't really exist for new players that joined during COVID. So as a result of that, 40k particularly is getting much more mainstream, because there's loads of people that just play it and they have no sort of jaded context through which to view it. And somebody said to me at an event yesterday, I was at an RTT, they said, oh, it's nice that 40k is not something you have to be ashamed of anymore. And I said, well, number one, you have to be ashamed of it anyway, regardless. But number 2, like the mainstreaming of a niche hobby can only be good for the future of it. So, yeah, exciting times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you've raised a really interesting point there, and I think this is probably the best time that we can give you to sort of wax lyrical about what your next steps are. Where I mean, I know we've seen your recent article about like 1-day tournaments and things like that, but let's say 5 years down the line, where do you want to be?
Yeah, so 5 years down the line is an interesting point because I haven't thought about that. I'm still very much in the 2-year planning stages for the UKTC. So we're coming to the end of like a planning cycle for us. All the events for this calendar year have been announced. We've got all our venues locked in for them and through to summer of next year. So for me, sort of the next phase of introspection, business planning would come from like summer 2025 till end of 2027. And I don't know at the moment. I think the interesting thing is going to be how Games Workshop, now owning the ITC, how that interfaces with sort of ecosphere of what organized play looks like worldwide. I think we're going to have to be very flexible and adapt to whatever that looks like. So at the moment, I don't know. We're keen to continue with our mission, which is just to make high quality, professionally organized, massive events as accessible as possible. So my view of a successful event is one that's as big as possible, that as many people who want to go can go to. And then those people who go to it are happy and satisfied with the product. So we're doing that as widely as we can at the moment in terms of dates. We've got events going on as frequently as we can at the moment, and as geographically spread out as we can at the moment. So they're sort of our two things in terms of like when I think about like quantity of events, in terms of quantity of country covered and quantity of in terms of frequency. So our next stage is like growing those events themselves. So the calendar probably was going to be relatively static for the next couple of years because we're going to be focusing on size and so scale and quality improvements of the events that are now established, rather than anyone that's been playing UKTC events for the last couple of years will notice that this year was our big year in terms of going to new places, getting bigger venues and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, I mean that's nice to hear that it's malleable in terms of what you're looking at next. And something that we've seen potentially a little bit more recently is now, while as it's always just been UKTC, there's potentially a few more larger GTs starting to set up. I mean, we've seen Glasshammer, obviously, they've got their larger event coming up in June. How do you think that kind of ecosystem is going to adapt, and how are you going to adapt to that not competition per se, but other events and how they're going to grow, and how do you see yourself in that ecosphere?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, like having more events that are different is only going to be a good thing. It means that customers are going to get consistently high quality service, and if they don't, then they'll vote with their feet and they'll leave. Yeah. So I'm kind of don't participate in this whole like terrain debates. If people want to argue about if frontline gaming terrain player place is better or worse than UKTC terrain, I don't really care about the debate, because ultimately the outcome of the debate should be which events have more satisfied customers. And when you have a whole podcast dedicated to how bad terrain at LVO is, I'm generally seeing trends in favor of my terrain. So like I don't really care what the debate is, I care what the outcome of the debate is. So when I see other events coming up, Dan Rattigan in Kent would be the perfect example. He's running large scale, but specifically 1 day events. I think it's great. I think like there's a niche of the community that can't attend super majors that are a 2-hour drive away for 2 days. And they want a large scale event that they can still go to. So there's a product there. There's a niche that's not being fulfilled, and there's a product there. Now, I'm not really fussed. Like, I tell everyone that asks me this, how can I make my event more popular? I was like, make it more unique. Because events used to differentiate themselves based on their tournament pack. And that's something that's kind of disappeared recently over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. You haven't been playing long enough, but there used to be Highlander events all over the place. Like, when's the last time someone went to a Highlander event? When's the last time someone went to an event that wasn't 2,000 points? Like, it's very rare nowadays that an event pack would be significantly different. from then the standard that I've sort of established. So I can sort of tell TOs, like, if you want to do something, either market it as a specific, hey, this is a practice event for another event, and therefore using the same pack, or say we're doing something different from the norm, and this is how it's different. And if you want to do something different, then come to our event. And at the moment, most events only differentiate themselves based on are they more convenient in terms of location, and are they more convenient based on calendar? So are they more available to you in terms of your personal diary and your personal place of living? And that's not a good way to set your product apart. No one's going to travel to an event that's the main reason they're selling it to. So so good on anyone who wants to come up with a good idea. And if it's a really good idea, then hopefully it should become the norm, and then everyone has to keep adapting. So that's that sort of thing. For fixed terrain maps would be the perfect example. It's like that wasn't a thing until we made it a thing, and now everyone does it. So when you talk about competition, other people running these new events, I'm like, yeah, they're running new events, but they're running standardized terrain packs with maps in the tournament pack. That's something that we basically, in the UK at least, established and created the norm around. So it's great for the customer, and ultimately, we sort of skipped at the beginning, but the reason the LGT started was because I myself, as a tournament player, wanted a good tournament to go to. So it's great. I'm super happy. More competition, the better. It forces us to keep sharp, keep improving our game. And anyone that's come to my events knows how much I'm desperate for feedback and ideas. It's in my closing speech every event we go to. And I say, please tell us how we can get better, because the thing we suffer on now is not delivery; it's coming up with the good ideas. So if some other TO comes up with a good idea, then that's great. They're giving me a free idea. It's a gift. Feedback's a gift. So good for them.
I want to ask actually something along that. Sorry, Toby, I'm going to interject here. So, I really like the kind of how you've started, and you've developed a lot of things that have actually really, and I don't think people realise in the population just how much the UKTC has shaped the tournament scene in the UK, but not only in the UK, but like across the world, right? And let's go to the LGT, and you have got a little bit of competition with the LGT in the sense the LVO always wants to try and be bigger, and I love, and I don't know if this is a thing, and I don't know if you probably don't feel this, but certainly for onlookers, it seems like there is like a battle of who's going to be the bigger tournament, and me obviously being British, and I still believe that the UK Warhammer scene is the most competitive and has the best players in the world, because we have tournaments so frequently, so close together, and we attend very regularly, which makes me think that the LGT is arguably the biggest tournament in the world, because people from the UK all attend it in their droves, and then you have people from around the world attend it in their droves. And I think it's much harder for a country as large as America to back something like the LVA. How do you feel about all of that?
It's a really interesting point, because it dovetails with another massive change in competitive Warhammer over the last couple of years. But the LVO and the LGT have been in this long-term battle, and we've been perennially second place. We've narrowed that gap considerably over the years, and LVO shrank this year quite considerably. So if there's going to be a year where we beat them in terms of pure quantity of players, it's going to be this year, because LGT is still on a rising curve and LVO is on a declining one. So I think that's, if everyone listens to this, buys a ticket, we're substantially closer to that target. So that's one thing. In terms of like the play quality thing, I 100% would have agreed with you and had made that exact same point about 4 or 5 years ago. We spoke earlier about like what COVID did for the hobby, but what COVID also did for the pinnacle of the competitive scene is to push a lot of those people onto TTS. And the argument that the best players play each other frequently in the UK and therefore get even better used to be 100% true. Now we have players that are playing each other all across the world every single evening. So you've got the Ignite guys, for example, they're playing games against the Stat Check guys in the States, I think against Team Poland guys, and they're doing that every evening. So the sort of sphere for top tier players to have top tier practice partners all around the world and share ideas is getting bigger and bigger. Now, what I would say is the average standard of play in the UK, so not the best players, but the average, the median player at a super major is significantly better than the median player at the LVO, for example. So a couple of Brits that went over to LVO this year. There wasn't many this year, but James Pilkington, Kyle Brandy, neither of those have ever won a super major in the UK. Kyle made it his way all the way to the final of the LVO, and James Pilkington, with pre-data slate custodies, so worst army in the game, went 4-2. So if you think of James as being like a marker of, okay, if his performance is 3-2 in the UK, and he's able to go to LVO, a bigger, supposedly more competitive event, and get an additional win on his win record, then there's probably a quality difference there. So I think that is a really important point. I think the average standard of play in the UK is significantly higher. I think at the top tier, the best players in the world are all basically equal. But if you do look at the top 10 of the ITC this year, 6 out of 10 of those were Brits. So, there seems to be to do a good score in the ITC, you need to consistently perform well at consistently big events. So if we take that as the sort of metric for how good people are, then you can say that Brits are 60% of the top 10 and Americans are 40%. So we're about 50% better. There's a statistic, they say there are lies, true lies, and statistics. There's that.
That was brilliant. So Steve versus Chili Shots, he's just written in the chat, Zach, and he says you just have to look at the ITC placings. Speaks volumes for the number of top players from the UK. And this is true, like, even in, like, local gaming chats, so, like, the Black Crow chat, for example, like, we have obviously grown quite considerably over the last sort of 12 months with our member base, and a lot of our members, although they're not necessarily, we're not hitting the UKTC hard yet, but it's coming. We have a lot of players who are in top 10, top 5, number 1 of their faction in the ITC, and then you also have to think about all those other players out there, all the 6++ guys, all the Mind Goblins, all the Vanguard Tactics, all of those. They all do very well in their factions for ITC, which obviously is at an international. So, you can all look at it and be like, because we go to so many tournaments in the UK, because it's so easy for us to get an event. Like in America, for them, some of them to go to an event, they have to fly. We drive 2 hours. We think driving to London from Norwich is a long distance, This is my point. You travel the entire country every month. You go all over the place, and that just shows that actually you've made it a lot more. You kind of showed an example. It's very accessible. Tournaments are really accessible now. If it's not,
and the thing, you talk about the size of the country thing, but like, we used to have to travel from South, I grew up in South London, from South London to a suburb of Manchester just to play in an event that was more than 32 people. And yeah, it's still a drive, but it's a 4-hour drive that you don't want to be doing first thing on Saturday morning. So, the accessibility thing is really important. It's not just the accessible thing, it's also like the quality things. They have to go hand in hand. Like, you would travel further to go to an event that you know is going to be of better quality. And in the States, they do have some really top quality events that are spread out and all that sort of stuff. But if you just look at the size of them, like with the exception of LVO, I think month on month, the UK always consistently has a bigger event that month. So yeah, if you exclude LVO in Jan or Feb and the American Team Tournament, which is their other big one, in August or something, then pretty much every month the biggest event in the world tends to be in the UK, which is shows you the size of the scene here. It's like the American scene is in total bigger, but the size of the UK tournament scene is in total bigger. So I think that's a really important point. So we have more people regularly attending events. Although it's still not masses, like it's still growing and lots of scope to grow. So if you think of in the first UKTC season, we had about 200 tournaments take part with about 3,000 or 4,000 total players. but half of those 3,000 or 4,000 total players only played in one tournament that year. So that means that if those same people, so even if the market stays the same size, but those same people just go to 4 events rather than the one they go into a year, that's like another 70 sold out tournaments every year.
Gosh.
And that's the real big thing. It's like, and so that was the first year UKTC. Second year, we grew the events to like 300 or something. Total attendance went up to about 6,000. So over double the amount of people participating. And that stat of 50% of people basically still only playing one event stayed broadly the same. So when I talk to a lot of TOs all the time, and like lots of people saying, oh, you know, attendance is down here and here. So I said, well, number one, like I said earlier, like what's the 15? What's the elevator pitch for like why we'll make sure event worth coming to other than location and date? But number two, it's like there are people there that want to go to more events. It's all of those people that go to 1 out of 4 events every year because they clearly are tournament curious enough to be playing regularly. So they're probably yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this is what I say. Another one of the things I say in my closing speeches is everyone that stayed for the closing speech of an event clearly loves tournaments enough to not only go to one but also hang around an extra half hour at the end. And I tell all those people, I'm like, go home and find your mate that you know would like a tournament if you just went to one. That guy from your club that plays well, he's a competent player, and get them to come to a tournament because once you're into the scene, it's great. Like it's a big community of people. Like pretty much all the time, everyone gets on. You're making new friends. Like loads of teams made their team based on going to tournaments rather than the other way around. Aaron, you're a bit of an exception, bringing 30 people from one team to the tournament. But there's the guys from Leicester, the Death Corps of Queen's Road. They were just dudes from Leicester who met each other at our tournaments, and they said, "Oh, I'm from Leicester too. Let's found a club." And now they have their own club and team. So I think it can go both ways. And the sort of mainstreaming of the hobby, as we spoke about earlier, and this sort of growth opportunity that I've been talking about sort of can go hand in hand. I think it's an exciting time. All these little topics are kind of interlinked. You asked me like, what the plans are for 5 years. Well, the ideal goal would be to get 40k as accessible as soccer. Like any Sunday, you can go join your local league, play down the park. Any evening of the week, you can call up your mates and say, let's go play a game of footy. If we can get Warhammer to that, not obviously it's never going to be as popular as football, but if we can get it as accessible as football, where you can go get a game in whenever you want to get a game in, then we will have achieved our goal. So that's really where I'm trending towards in terms of how I'm thinking about our UKTC's future, but also just Warhammer in general. It's like that's where I'd like to see it go.
Do you think then that you might start collaborating with teams a little bit more if they're the kind of the grassroots? And like, because I know with our scene, we try and interact with our non-team players as much as possible so that we can hopefully grow the team with them, but also we can have more people enjoying tournament play and learning and seeing it done in what we perceive as the right way of sportsmanship and everything like that. So do you think you'll interact more with teams?
Yeah, we actually have an affiliate program which was designed to not specifically work with teams, but clubs. So local gaming store communities or independent club-based communities that targets the people like yourselves that are key, influencers in that local community, and says, "Look, you guys clearly like what we're doing. If you've been coming to our events, what can we do to support you guys in selling the idea that tournaments are amazing to the rest of your club?" And I spent ages doing this whole. It's like a 20-page document about like this is how the program works. This is what we're going to do with it, blah blah blah, and it's unsurprisingly a large amount of work to actually monitor and run day to day, and I'm basically tapped out at the moment. I'm working sort of 6 days a week for the last 4 months. So when we have more management capacity, we'll be relaunching that. And part of the UKTC Discord, there's 2 channels, which are promote your club and promote your store in these channels. And that's part of this same sort of grassroots thing, which is it's really hard to promote the UKTC to a local club if we don't know the club exists. And there's, I think, something like 600 gaming clubs in the country, and I probably only know about 40 of them. So trying to first stage is work out which clubs exist, work out who are the important people there in terms of people that are the club committee members or whatever, and then sort of start opening those dialogues. Podcasts like this and forum you guys are giving me tonight are really beneficial for that. So thank you very much.
So thank you for joining us. I think one thing I'd like to talk to you about as well is you mentioned roughly that we're bringing 30 people to the ITT. Now I wanted to kind of just touch on like why we were able to do that, because I think it's important for you, Zach, to know how we've been able to kind of achieve that. So essentially what happened was Black Crow started and it was maybe like 15 people down in Dorchester, and we kind of started talking about what we wanted to do, and in the end we decided, well, we just want to make a space for average people who struggle, who don't get to that many tournaments but still want to go and play. So they're never going to be able to join the hyper competitive teams out there. But we wanted to make it so it's not about your result. It's not about your attendance. It's about wanting to be a part of our community. And then if you can go to as many tournaments as you want to, at least you know you're going to have somebody there potentially from our community who's going to be able to A, have a beer with you, B, share accommodation potentially, and just be a friendly face for the weekend. So it means that when they do come to these events, like your big events, at some point they know that there's going to be a Black Crow Gaming player there. So this has now grown. We've now got 50 players plus so far. We're looking to grow. There's no cost to joining us. We just want people to come and be a part of it. So it means that like we said to our group, we really want to all go and do a big showing at this ITT event. We didn't at any point think that we would have as many teams as we have, but now we've got a team from Wolverhampton, Black Crow Gaming. They recently joined us. They're coming. Then you've got a mixture of Devon from Dorset Way, Norwich, East Anglia, Suffolk. Got all these mixture of players now coming from all over the country, all coming to be a part of like one event. 30 of us for the weekend, and I think there's something to be said about teams focusing more on a community aspect than rather on the result, because we've gone from this community aspect and we're still getting results, and it just shows that actually it doesn't need to bother us, because when we win as one person wins, we win as a team, whether that be most sporting, whether it be being proud of the wooden spoon, best painted. Like, we celebrate that as a team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And the two other teams spring to mind that are similar, maybe not intentionally similar, but from, I've known for a long time, I can tell you are. One is Try Hard.
Try Hard.
They won the Best Name Team award at the ITT in February a couple of weeks ago. So we give out two fun side awards. One is Best Dressed Team, and one is best team names. So obviously people try to have fun with their team names. And Try Hard always win the best team names. So challenge, gauntlet thrown down for anyone that wants to try and beat them there. But they're very much the same sort of thing. I think they grew out of a Discord where it's just people just trying to get better at competitive 40k. And they, I think, bring like 4 or 5 teams. So that again is, community first, performance second. And they came 4th, I believe, at the ITT in Feb. And then War Masters are kind of similar. They're more location based than you guys are, but it's generally sort of London southeast. But fundamentally, it was like a group of guys that got on well with each other, that needed more practice partners, and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think they had about 3-4 teams, and came like 5th or 6th. So 2 other teams are both like community first, results second. Now, obviously, that's the one end of the dichotomy, and the other end of it is the Ignite style teams, which are all focused around performance, practice, getting your reps in, making sure that you don't let the team down, and they won anything. So the gap between the approach is massive, but the gap between the results actually isn't massive. If you think the gap between 1st and 4th is that gap, and there's 100 teams there, and the gap ultimately only came down to 4 places. So I think you're very much in the right. And linking it all back into what we've just been talking about growing the scene generally, community is absolutely at the basis of that. We're going to get more players playing the game based on, let's call it, marketing initiatives. So things like Amazon's TV show, Warhammer Plus, all of these more accessible types of Warhammer content related stuff. There will be more players that way. But ultimately, the way you're going to have better communities and longer term participation is going to be people who play with their friends, and communities are the key part of that. So like grassroots is fundamentally how we keep Warhammer being this amazing hobby. It's not going to be another TV show with a famous actor that makes our hobby better. It's going to be people like yourselves that are motivated to build and grow communities.
Very important point. I think sometimes I get a little bit taken away with Hollywood Hammer, right? Like, it's who do you know in the scene? What have they done in the scene? And I think Warhammer at its base, like Games Workshop, and Toby, you wouldn't have known this, but I think me and Zach have been playing the hobby for a similar length of time. Do you remember the battle bunkers, Zach, or what Games Workshop, when you could go in there and you could literally play in there Warhammer all day? And then
yeah. This is I try to explain this to people that don't weren't there, but like I used to finish school, go straight to Games Workshop, maybe play a game, but if I didn't play a game, paint for 2 hours. I would do that 5 nights a week. Then I would get there at 10 o'clock opening on Saturday, play 2 or 3 games. Most of the time, one in the morning would be like DM'd by one of the staff members, and then I'd play 2 or 3 pickup games in the afternoon. And then Sunday was beginner's day, so I wasn't allowed to go. So my 6 days of my week was built around going to Games Workshop. And now, if you went to Games Workshop and tried to do that, they think you're a weirdo. It's quite changed quite a lot. Yeah.
God, that was back in the day. God, Toby, I'll let you crack on with some questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think because there's some really nice points being made there, and the reason that I booked my second ticket for a UKTC tournament, because I've done one so far, I did Leicester, and I instantly booked my Northampton one afterwards, and that was because of the community feel that the tournament had and how friendly everyone was. My opponents were fantastic. All of the organisation was fantastic. It was such a good laugh with everyone there. How did you actually manage to create such a positive and friendly vibe? And like, especially when there has been quite this image of negativity at times around competitive Warhammer. So how have you kind of turned that on its head and created that positive, friendly atmosphere?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because it's almost like you have to not be friendly in order to create a community that's friendly. Let me explain what I mean by that. So, if you, as an organizer, are soft and touchy-feely and friendly with everyone, and you get an asshole turn up to your event, you can't be soft and touchy-feely with them because they're going to make 5 people miserable for your event. So you have to be, as a tournament organizer, quite hard lined with people who need you to be hard lined with, and with the vast majority of people, you can be soft and touchy feely because you're there being friendly face. So knowing when you need to be one person and when you need to be the other is super important. What's much more difficult than that is being able to do that fairly. So we don't arbitrarily make any judgment calls. So it's very much a case of, even when we know a player has a certain reputation, we don't treat them any differently than players that have 0 reputation, because everything has to be based on facts. And this is why it's so important for players that are having games that are going a bit south to get refs involved earlier rather than later, because after a game, if you complain about how the game went, there's basically no facts. If you get a ref over earlier on in the game, then we can establish what the facts are. So it's much easier for us to adjudicate in those sorts of situations. And we have a very robust policy set of procedures for how we do things, because we run so many large scale events. So we've got 2 things there. One, the bigger the events are, the more edge cases come up. So you have lots of frequency. And then obviously the more you run events, those frequencies are multiplied. So you have lots and lots of edge cases. And every time an edge case comes up where we don't have a policy in place for how we should react to it, we write a new policy for the next time it comes up. So over the course of, I think, something like 30,000 games we've officiated now, we've seen most things. So, for example, we had a game at an event over the last 6 months or so where two players were arguing about the outcome of a game. They couldn't agree. One person thought the other person had played in a foul manner, but instead of going through the correct channels in order to express his grievance, which we have, number one, if it happens at the time, you call a ref to the table. If you don't want to call a ref to the table, you can request a ref to the table via your phone, which is obviously more subtle if you want to do that. And then after the game's over, you can report it via the sportsman's report. What you absolutely cannot do is verbally assault somebody. You can't call them names, and you specifically can't do that in front of a referee. So when a referee observed this player do so, we could immediately take action because we had a policy in place for a behavior that was not tolerated, and we had evidence because we witnessed it. So we have the mechanisms to officiate the games. So it's really a question of just like, okay, this problem has occurred. Do we have evidence in order to make a judgment call that we're comfortable backing up if somebody questioned us? And if yes, this is our response. And when you follow that procedure, you end up with a nice friendly community because eventually people's behavior either gets corrected or those players are no longer welcome. And hopefully over time, that trickles down because even though we don't take reputation into account, in more local scenes where everyone knows everyone, those reputations do matter much more. And those players tend to, let's say, find it harder to find a game. So I'm really proud of the community that we've established. And in particular, comments like you've made about how friendly everyone is like the vast majority of people are that way naturally. But there's, say it's 1 in 300 that isn't. Well, when we're running 300-person events every month, that's one person at the event. So we've got to make sure we've got a policy to deal with it. And what I would say is the sort of my barometer for how well we've done that is when somebody hasn't played for like 4 or 5 years and they've stopped playing. So they used to have the tournaments it used to be, and then they come back and they come to one of the events. And there's one of two reactions. One is they just play how they used to play, and I have to sort of take them aside. So no one plays like that anymore. Everyone plays nice now. Everyone plays by intent. Everyone describes what they're going to do. People don't have arguments over little stupid rules anymore. And they either do that, and they're like, "All right, awesome," and they thrive. And that, or the alternative is they've always been that way anyway, and they come up and they say how nice it is to be playing in a way that they think 40K is always supposed to be played. So, out of all the things we've done, UKTC, like the change in what's considered like normal behavior at events is something I'm very proud of. I've obviously not done it alone. A lot of credit goes to number one, all the players for being genuinely nice people. Number two, also to the different refs and people I've worked with over the last sort of 4 years to push this, because it's not all me. I'm the guy that's sort of organizing the events, but I'm people that come to the events, they don't really see me walking around the floor that much. I'm more sort of coming up with the policy, and then it's down to the refs to make sure that it's done properly. So they deserve a lot of credit themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've summed that really nicely up, and I think any TO listening now, that's the perfect example of how to deal with these things. And I think you're absolutely right, because I was going to ask next, how do you deal with it if maybe someone's a little bit nervous to speak to a ref or things like that. But I really like the fact you've got that ability to call them over with a phone and things like that. So I think, and that's probably something that maybe if people are nervous about going to tournaments, that they can hear about here, hopefully, and know that they'll be in safe hands when they do go to them. And I can personally say that if you ever have an issue, refs are over there in seconds and sort it out so quickly, and in a really, really positive manner. So the other thing I really like is that you guys do beers quite early so that you can have a pint with your opponent. And honestly, when in my first UKTC game, I was up against Tom Dooch, who just I think he'd just gone undefeated at LGT and then was dumped out in the shadow round. His words, not mine. His turn 2 went spectacularly well. My saves were not so good, and so I just went and bought him a pint, and we had a laugh instead. And I just love that kind of vibe that you can, even though we are playing competitively, it's still toy soldiers, and everyone seems to buy into that so much. And I do think that is a testament to what you guys have built and what you've just discussed there. So huge kudos on that. We did have a question around sort of sometimes, and I think the more we get this is really because of the internet and Reddit and things like that. But sometimes top players get the odd time where they're constantly under a microscope. Obviously, you've said how you don't judge by reputation or anything like that. How do you interact with those top players in a different way, in the same way? Is there what's the situation with those top, like, well-known, like Hollywood Hammer, as Aaron called it, those names?
I love that phrase, Hollywood Hammer. It's brilliant. I always talk about Henry Carvel when I've mentioned Hollywood. But the answer to your question is they get treated differently, but not for the reason you described. So the players who are going to win the event get refed more closely than those who are going to win the wooden spoon. Why is that the case? We have more ref resources on the top tables. So that's just, one ref for fewer people, so they're more accessible. For example, the epitome of this is the final game has a ref standing on the table for the whole game. So they're ref more closely because of that. Whether that person has their podcast or is a well-known person or has never been to an event ever before is completely irrelevant. So the players who are more likely in line to win the event get ref more closely. So that's the number one thing. That's why if you are undefeated on day 2, somebody will come to your table and tell you to put a clock on. So, and that happens to a large variety of people that have never played with a chess clock before, and they have to look at you and they say, "Oh, why?" So, well, because you might win the event, and we can't have any time issues for anyone that might win the event, so put your clock on. Now, the second part of that is obviously a lot of the events are won by the same, say, 50 people, the same 30 people. So those people getting refed more closely tend to be some of the same people each time. But we don't ref them more closely because they're those people. We ref them more closely because their performance requires them to be refed more closely. So that's number one. The second point about, how do we interact with people based on something that we've heard on Reddit or whatever. So number one, because of the stature of our events, some of those Reddit posts or whatever may be about something that happened at one of our events. In which case we will have first-hand information. And where we have first-hand information, obviously we will take that into account about how we're reffing stuff. We won't take something that we've heard on Reddit into account, mainly because 99% of it is, even if it's about something true, it's probably misrepresented. And most of it, probably isn't true to begin with. So we generally don't do it. I, for one, don't read Reddit. Full stop. I'm like, if something is important enough, then somebody will come tell me about it. And if somebody's going to come tell me about it, then having a conversation is going to be much more productive than reading a post that's taken out of context. So I'll always value a conversation. This is why, if somebody makes a complaint post on Facebook about an event they've gone to, I'm much less inclined to take their word as being meant with good intentions in terms of, this is a problem I had, please improve upon it. But then if somebody came up to me event and said, I'm really disappointed about how this went, can you fix it? So as that relates to specific players, I'm trying to think of an example that isn't that's relevant. So there's an event that happened recently that wasn't one of my own, but was a relatively high profile event. 2 well-known players had a dispute in the semifinals. I know both those people and I know their reputations. What do I think, or how am I going to ref either of those people differently at our events based on what happened at this third party event? Well, I'm not going to. The simple answer is I already knew everything I needed to know about them because they've been coming to most of my events for ages. Some evidence may exist for past behaviors that will require us to take that into account. Some won't. But ultimately, if people need to be ref differently, that's because they've generally done something that we will have on file for them. And we don't change our procedures that I discussed earlier. It just means that, like, if in very, very edge cases where we have to make a judgment call, there is one extra piece of weight on one side of that, what do you call it, weighing scale than the other side. And that's not arbitrary. That's a real thing. This is why we don't take reputation into account. It has to be evidence-based. It has to come from one of our events, rather than just being like, so-and-so did this at LVO, therefore when they do something at your event, you have to, rule against them. It's like, no, we had a time complaint at a recent event, one of our own events, against a player who at the previous event he attended had a time complaint against them. So when I adjudicate it the second time, I say, look, we already know that you have issues with this. We had to make a ruling, and we keep track of this. At every event we have this is the issue that came up, this is the step we took, this is the outcome of the steps we took. And that we keep that, it's an ongoing list. We keep live from event to event. So I don't even need to remember. I can go on the thing, do Control F search for the player's name, and be like, has this person ever caused issues before? And it will tell me history of list errors. It will tell me history of late list submissions. It will tell me history of any sportsmanship interactions. We have over something like 100,000 data points of sportsmanship behavior now from all our QR codes. So if I really cared, which I obviously don't, but I could pull up a specific player that everyone complains about their reputation or whatever. I could plot a graph of how their behavior interactions have changed over the course of 5 years. No, I don't need to do that most of the time, because most of the time it's as simple as this person's been timed out on 3 different times against 4 different people, whatever. If it's doing 4 different people, then clearly the 4 different people aren't the problem, it's this person. So we don't ref them differently. Any player that comes to the event, if they had that same problem 4 times, would get ref the same way. So it's a cumulative thing. It's not about person's reputation, it's about their behavior. So yeah, I feel like that should
that's fascinating that you have that access to that data, and actually, what that just kind of shows just actually how professional the scene has become in the UK and how professional you've made it. Is that your quality improvement has gone that far that your business model focuses around making sure that you are consistent with your rulings, with the way that you behave, with the way the players behave, so that that actually you have more control over what happens that way, and you have that evidence to back your decision. And as we know, evidence-based decision making is the way to go. Like it's I mean, as long as you're not fluffing the results.
Make an important point, which I feel people should know. We don't share any of that data with anyone. So if anyone ever comes up and says, how did I score? Can you tell me if people have scored me badly? The answer is always a polite no. If another TO comes up to me and says, I've heard bad things about this player, I read a post about this player, can you tell me about how he's been at your events? The answer is, again, a polite no. So the anonymity of that, both from the players submitting the scores and the players themselves, is super important to us. I know it annoys a lot of other TOs because they feel like we should be outing bad actors wherever possible, but that is something that we deliberately don't do, because the one occasion we did do it before where we had to red card somebody and did it publicly, I really regretted doing, and it's not healthy for, number 1, the hobby, number 2, tournaments specifically, and number 3, the player base is themselves. So we try to keep everything very tight in terms of those policies, and robust is the main things. It's like you mentioned professionality, but like the real keywords that we try to run the business on, not in the business, but the brand and the things that we try to associate people's minds is that one thing is biggest. Like the sort of events should be big, because that means there's more people enjoying this hobby that we love. So we're not afraid of saying like being big is important. Being the best in whatever that means, and this is all the thing about feedback. So whatever best means to the people that are attending, and trying to identify what it is and then do it. But the third one is professional. They're sort of our 3 key keywords that really summarize everything we try and do at the UKTC. And a lot of that comes from sort of being around a long time in the tournament scene and just seeing like where things can go wrong if those three things aren't done. But yeah, it's sort of like if you were going to do a Venn diagram and where those three things interact, my goal is to keep the UKTC in that middle of the Venn diagram. And sometimes it can strain. Like prime example, 2018, the LGT got too big and wasn't professional enough, and the quality of the product that year was very low. But as a result, and it's something we rectified in the future. So 2019, we spent much more time trying to be as professional as possible. So. Sorry, I got really droning and technical about like.
No,
I
Warhammer
stuff, but more like branding.
Yeah, but
stuff.
This is important for people to. It's important for people to know, and I think what's fascinating is like we get like a kind of an not an in-depth, but like a sneak into how you've run the business and how you've made to make it as successful as you have, and your considerations for the future. One question that I've kind of been sitting here thinking for a little while, and I've kind of always kind of wondered this. Like, you are now so large as a tournament provider. I've always wondered, like, what is your involvement with Games Workshop, if any? Like, do they ever reach out to you? Because I found it really strange, just how much they're involved with like the LVO, with Frontline Gaming, all of a sudden. Like, that came out of nowhere, but they'd be attending their events and doing like reveals at their events. And I've kind of wondered, like, this is a UK based company, why are they not doing that at UKTC events? So is there any...
I mean, they kind of, it's a bit different. So yeah, Games Workshop is UK based. Games Workshop's events team is US based, so there's a big difference. Right?
Okay, that makes a big difference. Yeah,
but we do work with them, varying capacities, and have done for a long time. So I first started working with Games Workshop informally in 2015 or 16. So back then, obviously, the UKTC wasn't a thing; it was just the FGT. I chat to Games Workshop about it. Different people in the organization in different capacities about different things, multiple times a week. Anyone that comes to the events may have had the opportunity to have played multiple Games Workshop studio members who are at one of our events. Most recently, anyone that attended Nottingham may have had the pleasure of losing to Josh Roberts, who won the event, who is a Games Workshop employee. So they do attend our events in a sort of unofficial capacity, in that they're turning up and winning some of them.
I'm very excited for those 18 raids this weekend.
So that, no, I mean, yeah, they're not. There's also, like, you've got to remember, there's much less Games Workshops in America. So having a sort of physical presence at conventions has a bigger business impact to sort of get brand awareness of what the product is. Whereas in Games Workshop, even people that don't play Warhammer probably know what it is because they've walked past Games Workshop on the high street, and that doesn't really exist in the States. So yeah, I think that you just can't really compare the two like for like. It would be nice to have some sort of big to-do at the LGT specifically, but any other events, Games Workshop ultimately like probably aren't super motivated to put the head of rules writing in front of 500 angry tournament players when Eldor was smashing. Now, the head of rules writing was actually at an event when Eldor was smashing everyone, so anyone could have gone up to him, bought him a beer, and said, "Hey, look at all of these Eldor," and had a polite, friendly conversation. But doing a panel with that, I think, is probably not on the immediate horizon. I see one of the questions in the chat, just somebody asking about GDPR. Anyone that wants to know our GDPR policies, obviously they are all on our website. If you go down to the terms and conditions, of course, you can read those. And we're completely above board with all of that. So if you have any concerns about how your data may be being used, we have a data officer email.
That was so business appropriate. It was amazing.
Well, it's because people get really fussy, don't they? The Warhammer community has got its collection of tinfoil hat wearers. So I need to make a point that we are also aware of their people not wanting to have their data on file. So if you want your data deleted, you can do. What people should note is that the data that's most important on sportsmanship, this doesn't belong to the players. It belongs to the people that submitted it. It's those people's votes on best sports, not a player having data tracked more.
Clever.
So it's quite a different thing to holding somebody's email address or something like that.
Yeah, 100%. Zach, I've got so many questions, but I'm gonna bring it down to just one because I realise we've kept you for quite a long time. But I think there's another thing we talk about. We talk about like where you'll go with your tournament. Obviously, I have my little tournament in a little Norwich, not obviously of any scale, but something that I when I speak to people, people love to talk about terrain. They love to talk about maps. And come on, give us a nugget. Have you got any plans to change or mix it up or add or decrease your terrain packs in the future?
So the answer to that is 100% yes. We will be changing everything. Now, before everyone who's just bought 10 sets of terrain kills themselves, let me extrapolate on that answer. So how we'll be changing everything? I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because we'll be changing things in order to make sure that our maps are always... Okay, I don't know whose phone is next to their speaker, but there's picking up some buzzing. I'll throw mine across the room.
I've just done exactly the same. I thought it might have been mine. I was like, right, let's try that again. Take two.
Yeah, so the maps will definitely be changing. They'll be changing when they need to change, and that's generally dictated by the state of the game. So in going more recently from 9th to 10th, we lost our small walls, we boarded up the windows in our medium Ls, we rejigged our entire map philosophy. That went into another, so that was physical changes to terrain pieces. From that first draft to where we are now, we've gone through a second set of design philosophy changes, so everything moved slightly by 1 inch or 2 inches. And I don't know what 11th edition 40k is going to look like. And maybe all terrain needs to be two-dimensional, in which case, yes, all our terrain will fundamentally change yet again. So our terrain will never be static because the game isn't static and the meta isn't static. And that's a really good thing. Then the fact that we, as an organization, know that we need to be budgeting for this in advance, we're not going to get to a point where physically changing 4,000 ruins, which is what me and Gareth did over summer, is not being done because we don't have the budget, even though it needs to be done for the state of the game. Each of those 4,000 ruins, by the way, had 2 windows, so we had to stick 8,000 pieces of cardboard down to MDF ruins to make sure that we were prepped and ready for the LGT. So we will never make excuses for why terrain isn't fit for purpose. And anyone that knows the history of the LGT will know exactly why that's the case. And if you Google polystyrene terrain, you can find out too. So I think that's probably a good place to end there because I've got to run off now. But yeah, I think terrain is a big thing. People want to know that it's going to be not just bad for them, and people that run events want to know that they're not going to get shafted. So that we have to make sure that those two things are balanced. What I won't do is sacrifice player experience just to keep other TOs happy who have bought my terrain sets. And I make no money off selling those terrain sets. So it's not like some conspiracy theory out there.
No. I think one thing that's really important about the tournament scene is that there's actually several different types of terrain sets out there, and this is going to lead very nicely into our sponsor as well, Zach. I hope you don't mind. So we are sponsored by a local chap in East Anglia. He's called Terrain Forge, and he is making custom scenery to any of your designs. And all you need to do is contact him. His details are in our description, and he has made some amazing scenery. Zach, have you seen any Terrain Forge stuff yet? Have you had a chance to have a look?
I've not, no, but I've heard great things. Apparently, he's like replicated some of our dimensions for our competitive terrain, but it's like done in a very aesthetic setting or something.
Would you like to have a look at the Crow terrain?
Show me.
and it's slightly, so it's replicated yours, but it's slightly larger by about an inch or so. But I just want to show you this. Let's see if this comes up.
And where down we go, where down we go, say where down we go, oh, 'cause say we're running down to your car, oh, way down.
You know what? We're small budget, big performance.
Yeah.
But
Small budget, as I steal most of our marketing materials from the place I work, but shh, don't tell my boss.
yeah, sure. Don't. We it's called recycling. But no. So this is a one man band almost, and he basically created that tournament set to my specification, and it is incredible. He's recently just done a load of WTC tournament terrain for the Wales team, and I imagine that's because they're preparing for someone else's tournament. And I think it's a really cool thing. Like, all of a sudden, these independent, small time businesses who are into the hobby but have these skills where they have like laser cutters because of work that they might already do, and now started to utilize their skill. And this guy from Terrain Forge, I don't think he realizes just how good a set of terrain he has produced. But it's fantastic to play on, and if it's got the Zach seal of approval, then you know the man who has set up the UKTC must be all right? And you got to admit, the logo looks cool on it, doesn't it?
It does look very nice. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the main thing from our side of things is making sure that things work with our maps. So if you're going to buy, make sure you make your measurements properly. So we try to make our maps terrain set agnostic. So the point at which you measure to should enable you to use terrains like his that are slightly different dimensions.
So I actually,
by keeping the right size and blocking the right firing lanes off. So.
We're coming towards the end, but I just want to put, I actually literally played a game a couple of days ago. We used that terrain, and we copied one of your maps that we had from Leicester, in one of your books, and we were literally able to replicate it. And all we had to do was just come out slightly, because like I said, it's like 1 or 2 inches bigger. But we were able to literally replicate the entire thing and have the same experience, but with a different set of terrain. And I think it one of the cool things about Warhammer 40k is obviously the terrain that you play on, and that there's now so many terrain manufacturers out there, so many different styles. It just makes it a really interesting way. And some tournaments, Zach, I don't know if you've noticed, like, so I run a tournament, we did EA Slam, which was a collaboration of a few of the local tournament providers in East Anglia. We used several different types of terrain. That was then done at Hellstorm. They did it as well, several different types of terrain. Do you think that has a future in the competitive play? Do you like that?
So I think it has a future in the event scene, so in the organized play ecosphere. In the competitive tournament scene, no. I think the advantages of fixed maps, fixed sets is too great for that to never not be the case. Now it is the case. But what I mean by being within the organized play event sphere is, like, you can run a really good, well-attended, successful event with that terrain methodology. I just don't think it will ever become the competitive norm. And actually, this is, we've gone full circle. It links back to exactly about what I was talking about at the beginning about making events unique. Like, this is exactly the sort of thing that you can tell people when you have that 15 seconds to say, why should I come to your event? You say, we have a unique but still balanced and fair terrain philosophy that mixes the 4 biggest terrain methodologies in the world. You get a chance to play on all of them over the course of 1 weekend. Yeah, that's your selling point, Andrew.
You're a seller. There you go. You're a salesman.
Oh, I hate sales.
You hate sales.
I'm a project manager.
I like to point at things. So funny thing. So obviously I've known Gareth for years, maybe 6 or 7 years back when I worked at Games Workshop, and yeah, that's right, I worked at Games Workshop, folks. And there is such a thing as a black manager's book. Anyway, and Gareth was telling me about how he fixed that terrain with you. And I just saw the pain in his eyes from having to spend so much time working on that terrain, doing those windows. Bless him. I can imagine you were both absolutely exhausted from just the sheer amount of admin that must have been.
Yes, it's the highs and lows of being the world's biggest tournament organizer. A lot of revolves around an industrial estate of Leicestershire and Pritt Stick.
Pritt Stick and a dream, UKTC right there.
Toby's always watched shares and prick. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to say a massive thank you, Zach, for joining us tonight. One of the comments, I don't know if you've seen, is Harley. He's put, as a competitive player trying to be the best, this is an amazing insight into the tournament scene and how you do it. I just want to say again, massive thank you for giving us this opportunity to interview you. I hope it's not been too intense. And we will see you, not only Toby will see you at Northampton, we'll see you at the ITT, I will see you at Sheffield, we'll be at the LGT and Leicester again. So you're going to see us quite a lot. And if you see any other Black Crows at your events, just give them a wave and know that they've come from a team that are just coming out to have some fun. But anyway, if you like what you hear, guys, please drop us a like, give us a follow, give us a share. All these things help us grow. Obviously, we're trying to grow our community. We're trying to grow what we give. And I think doing these interviews with people like Zach, I think it's really good, cool insight into how the tournament scene has grown. And from us at Black Crow Gaming, we just want to say a massive thank you. And massive thanks to Zach. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Zach.
Guys, cheers. I appreciate it.
See you guys later. Bye.